All right, welcome back into the Chase and Big Joe show here, right here on 102.5 The Game, brought to you by the Omni Nashville Hotel. Chase McCabe is on assignment down in Florida. He'll be back on Monday. Dr. Crane, Nick Frazier in, Brando behind the board, and one of the best times of the week. We had to postpone it yesterday because he was doing something, but he's got him today. Welcome in ESPN analyst Tim Hasselbeck to the show. Tim, welcome in, buddy.
What's up? How you doing?
We missed you yesterday, buddy.
You know, it's spring break, so a little travel conflict, but good to be back on with you.
How was Daytona Beach?
Why am I keeping Fire Island all to myself? You know, like.
Oh my goodness! No, welcome back. Look, this is your. Has your son gone off to college yet, or is he an early enrollee?
Not an early enrollee. He'll go, normal time. So, going to have a normal second semester of senior year, which, quite frankly, I wish that more kids felt like they had the ability to do. Just racing through life, doesn't feel like the healthiest thing for so many of these kids that mid-year and, they mid-year somewhere, and who knows, a year or two later might be off to another school.
Yeah, I understand why they go and do early enrollees. I understand that. But the last part of my senior in high school was memorable and fantastic, and I would never give up that moments for what I had to go to college when I still have 5 years to play for.
No, I mean, it's really, one of the things that's wrong. People talk about what's wrong with college football and all that stuff. One of the things that's wrong is, guys are signing on National Signing Date in December, to go enroll in January, and sometime between December and January when they enroll, the head coach has either been fired or left for somewhere else. And so just when you look at the calendar and, when these things happen, when decisions have to be made, and then, who it actually is benefiting, it would be very hard to convince me that it's good for, in some of these cases, minors, kids that are 17 years old. So, there are a lot of things that are wrong and need to get fixed, and certainly the calendar of events, in terms of all that stuff, would play into it for me.
When you like when I reported to college, it was 1st of August. When you went to Boston College, was that the same? Because that's how it was back then, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that it was. Because I was a local kid. I probably was driving up and doing the summer workouts, the lifting and running, earlier than a kid that was from Pennsylvania or somewhere like that. But, nowadays, look, if you're going to play Division I football, you are going to report, just after graduation. In fact, I just, was told by one of my players, he has a report date that's before graduation. And so,
no.
Again, I do think that we're racing people through things. I just, had, was out with, some guys were working out with Jordan Palmer out in California, and there's a quarterback that was out there working out, a super talented kid. He's, he's committed to, an SEC program, and there's this talk about him reclassifying up. So basically he's got multiple years of high school left, but the idea of maybe becoming a senior. And
right.
And then I just read the story of this quarterback at Alabama who's been there like 4 years or something, and he's 19 years old. And I'm just, I'm like, why race through this? Why be in a hurry through this? And, you get the rest of your life to be guys like you and me, old and bald and like,
right.
Why do you, like, what's the hurry, man? Like, enjoy, especially nowadays where, look, you can actually be making some money while you're, still playing in college, and in some cases be making money while you're in high school. So, it feels like we are, in some of these instances, racing people through, a process that they should enjoy.
Amen to that. All right, talk to the NFL free agency. There's still a little bit out there that's going on. The Titans, they signed 15 guys, and some have a problem with this, Tim, and I don't. 12 of the 15 they signed have a relationship or cross paths with Borgonzi, Robert Saleh, or Brian Dable. I got no problem with that because they found guys can fit their scheme and they like, and people are like, well, those teams are terrible. But every bad team has good players. I don't mind this.
Oh, for sure. Every bad team has good players. And, the Raiders were terrible. Would people like Max Crosby? Like, yeah, they would. I mean, maybe everyone but the Ravens. So I guess what I would say is, like, that to me is the issue, or what I'd be focusing on is the team's record. What I think you need to take into consideration is, if you have a previous relationship with somebody or experience with them, that means kind of their professionalism, how they approach practice, their ability, what they were able to do, because you would see them, at a much more in-depth level than you would, just somebody that your pro scouting department has evaluated. But beyond that, you're going to have a more intimate knowledge of the player's injury history. And, in free agency, some of the biggest indicators are age and injury history. I remember getting a call. Now, I was no longer playing, but I was getting a call because the Giants were thinking of signing Anquan Bolden. And I got a call from the Giants, and they said, how often did he practice? And I was like, I mean, it wasn't like I was really trying to take inventory of it, but, their concern was he had remember how tough he was, right?
Yeah.
Like, he just was one of those guys. But so he was on the injury report a lot. And, it was like, did he have a broken foot? He had a broken jaw. His shoulder was bothering him. Like, he had this long injury history. And what they were trying to figure out was, okay, are we signing damaged goods at this point, or is this just a tough guy that was dealing through the bumps and bruises of the NFL? And it just struck me back then to be like, that's crazy, like that they're calling me to find out about his injury history because they don't know.
Right.
So I do think if you're the head coach of the Jets and you're signing an edge rusher that, had his knee scoped, what kind of practice time he missed because of, that knee surgery, if any at all. And so I generally think that if you're signing somebody, it's because you have such a good basis of knowledge, that is better than other people, and you feel good about signing the player.
So adding on to that, Tim, Calvin Ridley, taking in somewhat of a restructured deal there. What are your thoughts on that signing along with just his production? Is it just more of looking at him as I wouldn't say a damaged good, but is it just the rapport that he has with Brian Daboll at this point? Yeah,
well, and I think that, when, the guys that take pay cuts, it generally is because they know that the market out there for them isn't better. And so, I think that, the year Ridley's coming off of, it basically would put you in a situation of, not necessarily negotiating from a position of strength, and then the hope that, you can, what you're still going to get from, the Titans is going to be better than, what you would get somewhere else. And you feel like you can have a good year. Just, like pulling up his stuff. I mean, you just think about it for him, and obviously, didn't play, a ton of games last year, but he had 303 receiving yards, right? 0 touchdowns. This is a guy that, in 3 of the previous 4 seasons, he had over 1,000 yards receiving. In 3 of the previous 4 seasons, that he played in, he had over 100 targets, right? So, I think it's sometimes for a player when their numbers go down, their production goes down, and they feel like there are a number of factors to it, and they know what the market, potentially is for them. That's why, you take a contract that's maybe a little more digestible for the team, more so than, a relationship with a coach.
Right, absolutely. We'll have more with Tim Hasselbeck on the other side right here on Chasing Big Joe, 102.5 The Game. Back here on Chase McJoe, 102.5 The Game. Dr. Crane, Nick Frazier alongside Big Joe Dubin and Brennan Bigsby behind the glass. Here with Tim Hasselbeck. Tim, we were talking before the break about Calvin Ridley and the rapport with this team. You know, Wan'Dale Robinson, another player they brought in through free agency. How do you see that distribution happening between those two wide receivers?
Yeah, I mean, I think Robinson, obviously, that one feels much more, fresh, new, relationship-based. And look, he's a really productive, or was, last year anyway, a really productive player. So, in terms of, hey, who's the one, who's the two, target share, things of that nature, my guess would be that Robinson would be the guy that, plays inside a little bit more, in terms of the target share, probably gets targeted a little bit more. But I don't know that always means, okay, but you're the number one receiver. I think it just ends up being, like, necessarily like more role on the team in terms of how the players use, right? Like, to use an extreme example, like Wes Welker played inside, majority of the targets, but Randy Moss was outside and, probably ended up scoring more touchdowns.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong with this assessment, but like hearing Brian Daboll back when he was introduced as the Titans offensive coordinator, someone asked him about just his style of offense, and he responded with just it's how you present your play style, your play design. And to me, I think with the rapport he had with Calvin Ridley at Alabama, connecting that with just game planning as a defense, if you have to game plan for the Titans offense, I would say it's more of just I would say disguising things and using Wan'Dale Robinson to more of their advantage.
Yeah, and I think, Robinson is he's a unique player because, of his, quickness, his, ability to be dangerous once the ball is in his hands. Maybe you see some of the stuff that like the Rams have done with, Puka Nacua, where, I don't call them like jet sweep type stuff, but how it helps your run game with kind of, things out you can block a run front side. You have the ability to hand the ball to somebody that's going in motion, going the other direction, who's a dangerous, ball carrier, things like that. Like, I think those end up being significant factors, looking at Robinson, though, like this is why I think it's a certain way. Robinson, so people understand, each of the last 2 years has had 140 targets. That's a massive number of targets. And so he's had over 90 catches in each of the last 2 years. He's scored a total of 7 touchdowns. Receiving in those 2 years. So I just, I say that because, there are elements of, guys that convert on third down, that move the chains, that are wildly productive players that, that every team wants. But you still need to score touchdowns. That's why, I remember a few weeks ago, we were having a conversation about Mike Evans. Listen, Mike Evans catches touchdowns. You go look at like Devontae Adams. I don't know how many catches Devontae Adams had this year, but he led the NFL. Well, it wasn't 90, and he led the NFL in touchdowns. And there is an element with these bigger, more physical receivers with big catch radiuses that they just get opportunities inside the 20-yard line to score. And that's why I do think that, Robinson's role, I think, is always, at his size, is always going to, there's going to be limits to it in terms of how he's used.
I'm with you on the touchdown part because you probably don't remember this guy, but Brad Baxter, fullback for the Jets, all he did was score touchdowns from a yard out. Every time they got inside the one, they'd hand it to Brad Baxter. He'd score a touchdown. That was his only goal. And I get, nobody cared that he got 3.2 yards per carry. He got into the end zone. So you're exactly right there, Tim.
Yeah, I mean, I think that not every receiver – gets used exactly the same, right?
Yeah.
And so, I think that, and I think that's where teams can really do a good job in their scouting department and their roster construction of how they, how they are doing it. Like just pulling it up is where, we're sitting here looking at it. Devontae Adams had 60 receptions this year for under 790 yards, but he caught 14 touchdowns.
Ooh.
And if you just look at throughout his career in 2022, he caught 14 touchdowns. In 2020, he caught 18 touchdowns. He's been a double-digit touchdown guy, in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I mean, in 8 different seasons. So in 12 years of playing in the NFL, 8 different times he caught double-digit touchdowns. So, in a terrible year with the Jets in 2024, he caught 7 touchdowns, which is what Wan'Dale Robinson on 185 catches in 2 years, had in the last 2 seasons with the Giants. So I just think that how you build your roster in terms of, okay, this guy's good at this. Somebody, introduced me to the term years ago with system-specific scouting, right? And so what that really means is, okay, this is the role that you play in our system. Like, we're not just adding a receiver because he was good somewhere. Is the stuff that he does relatable to what we need in terms of how our roster is constructed, in terms of he's the guy that plays inside, he's the guy that plays outside, he's the guy that does a great job of blocking, on perimeter throws because we major in that type of stuff. Hey, is he a tight end that can do the things that we ask our tight ends to do? And I think that's why, with Robinson, I think he's going to have a ton of targets. I think he's going to have a ton of catches. I think he's going to touch the ball a lot.
Right.
And I think the majority of the times he touches the football are going to be within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, that's a good point there. Let me ask you this. Why the Dolphins signed Malik Willis, right? So he needs weapons. Why would they trade Jalen Waddle away to the Broncos?
I think it's probably an understanding of where you are, the cost of a player, other contracts that you have up, what you can get. Do you think you're going to be good right now, or is it better to be good in a couple of years? I think one of the things that comes up quite a bit is, like, I kind of bring it back to, and people will remember, when Mike McCarthy and Ted Thompson, the general manager of the Packers and head coach at the time, when they made the move from Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers, they had all just signed new contracts. If they were going into the last year of their deals, they would have never done something like that. Mm. So, I do think that oftentimes moves that teams are making, while the runway we all know is not very long, 2 bad years and you'll get fired, right?
Yep.
So, but year 2 is to be good in year 2 is much more important than being good in year 1.
No.
Right?
Yes.
And so, I think that a move like that is more about, let's make sure that we're getting better in year 2 with our new quarterback and new head coach than necessarily what 2026 looks like.
So it's the Dolphins kinda waving the white flag on this season?
Yeah, I don't know that it's like, I don't know that I would agree with like the characterization of it being like, hey, it's the white flag, but I think essentially acknowledging we're not a Super Bowl team. Yeah, sure. Like, you know what I mean? Like, yep. Like, we're not doing every single thing we can to make sure that 2026, that we're squeezing everything out of the 2026 season as possible. Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. Doesn't mean you're tanking, doesn't mean, because I do think that you're building for something. I do think there is carryover year over year, but I also don't think that the Dolphins are sitting here saying, yep, like, we're making moves to be a Super Bowl team this year, right? And I think there are a lot of teams that do that, but I don't know that that means that it's tanking.
Okay.
Tim Hasselbeck's online with this. Tim, one of the units that gets forgotten about in football is the special teams unit. With the Titans bringing in Tommy Townsend, it just seems since Ryan Stonehouse this franchise has never seemed to solidify a punter. Just where do you see Tommy Townsend fitting in with this group, and is it enough for Bones Fossil to kind of restructure the special teams to make it what it used to be?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that I guess it was, it's kind of been a disaster. You go back 2 years, it was 2 years ago, it was running together now. It was a disaster, right? Like costing games and, kind of forcing, the hand. Look, I think the commitment to Fossil is a big deal. I think he's widely viewed as, one of the best special teams coordinators in the NFL. And I think, wouldn't be surprising at some point in the future you end up seeing him as a head coach. So I think that's a big investment, and I think investing in the kicking game, well, it's like never fun. It doesn't, probably generate the talk radio or ESPN buzz that other things generate. Man, there's so many hidden yards in that stuff, and you think about. You look at certain teams and the number of one-score games they play in the season, like that literally could be the difference. So I think it's an encouraging thing. I often think that defensive coaches value that more than offensive coaches just because they know the stress of defending a short field versus defending a long field. They know the stress of, just being willing to take points. I think that's one of the things that, if you look at, the Niners, just even last year, I thought there were times that the Niners were going against the curve a little bit in terms of being like, yep, we're going to be okay kicking field goals. And I think it's benefited them. So I look, Salah was a part of that. So I think those things are important as people, kind of get into this really aggressive nature, analytics, and it makes sense to go for it on these fourth downs or go for it in some of these red zone situations.
Tim, I value your opinion as an NFL analyst so much, and I apologize for my co-host asking you a question about a dumb punter. I apologize for that.
Hey, no, here's the thing, though. It's actually great. Like, it doesn't make it's one of these. I think we talked last week a little bit about like there'll be this like second and third wave of free agent signings, and it's like, oh yeah, and we got him. Like no big deal. Like no one was going crazy about it, but when you look up at the end of the season, you're like, dang, like that was as impactful as some of the day one signings that we were talking about. So look, it's listen, it's not an exciting topic,
right?
But at the same time, it is. I mean, it's if you really care about your team, look, it's as important as a lot of things that get done.
Oh, I'm with you on that. Hey, real quick, and I know we're up against the break, but I want to ask you, this is actually a serious question. Are you concerned about AI invading recruiting? Because there's this thing out now where guys are uploading their video, and it's AI. They're making these plays that never happen. Is this a concern, Tim, or is this a nothing burger?
I think ultimately it's nothing. I mean, I remember back when guys were getting accused of, like, just speeding up their film. But it's wild. And I think the biggest thing is the people who will win in all of this, right? From a player perspective, it's the kids that are more concerned about being in love with playing football and just becoming the best they can possibly be,
right? Rather
than the people that love the attention of recruiting, right? I see it all the time. It's like kids love collecting offers. Like, you can only go one school.
Right.
So you can collect all the offers you want, but you can only go to one school. So, like, that's there's that side of it. And then from a college perspective, the people that are going to win are going to be the people that actually do the work. I have been amazed in the role that I have now at Ainsworth at how lazy people are in recruiting.
Wow.
It's absolutely crazy. The lack of leadership, the laziness, basically just chasing somebody else's evaluation of somebody. And I think, we're just talking about system-specific scouting and things of that nature. If these schools would actually do the work themselves and do the research themselves and really investigate, hey, is this, tell me about this player. What do you think? I'll give you an example. There's a local school in state that offered a kid of ours yesterday. But before the head coach pulled the trigger on the offer, he was like, look, this is our evaluation. Am I seeing it correctly? And then beyond that, tell me what kind of kid he is. And they're doing their work. And I think that, and for example, they're going to be right on the player because of it. And whereas I think when people just come in and they're just following the leader because they've seen what somebody else has done or there's some rating, it literally is a dog chasing its tail.
Oh. That's such a good analogy for that. I just it's all changing, and it's just something that we're crazy. Before we go, one more real quick. I've got a list here. The last time a Power 4 team knocked off a number 1 seed. The last time a Power 4 team knocked off a number 1 seed, Boston College. The last time they knocked off a number 1 ranked team. Do you remember what it was?
What were you talking about? Is this heading into like March Madness or is
no
this
football? Football. This is football. The last time a Power 4 football Boston College team knocked off the AP ranked number 1 team.
I'm going to go back to Glenn Foley, Notre Dame, right after Notre Dame, I think, beat Florida State.
You are an absolute legend. You are correct. 1993. Well done.
Look at that. Is that it?
Yeah, that's it.
I felt like Matt Ryan had a stretch where maybe he beat like a Georgia Tech team or somebody that was really good, but I don't know that they were ever the one, the number 1 team.
That was it. Tim, as always, man, we love talking to you.
How many brackets do you fill out?
I stop at like 20.
Unbelievable. How do you doesn't that take the enjoyment out? Like you don't even know what you're cheering for?
Exactly, Tim.
0. Because ESPN, your company does it all for me, so I just sit back and watch.
I think 5's the proper number.
Right? You think Alexander the Great stopped at one country? No, he conquered the world. That's what I'm doing here, Tim.
I'm going with just one bracket, and then that way, when when a game comes on, I know which team I want to do well. If 5 brackets, you're going to be like, which one are you cheering for? Think the guy that's like, well, I don't care about it for that. I don't care about, Calvin Ridley's stats for that fantasy team, but I do for that. I'm like, nah, come on. That's awful, man.
That's why you are where you are, and we're over here. So you always win. So you're right. Hey,
we're the same, man. What are you talking about?
Appreciate you, brother. Thank you as always.
See you, fellas.
All right, Tim Hasselbeck, ESPN. We get lucky with these guests, man, with Tim and John McClain, Drew Maddox yesterday, and Fisher. We could talk all day long. All right, we'll take a break. We're running late. Back with more right here on 102.5 The Game.